The narrative begins in a lush and isolated region where an old house rests surrounded by the silence of nature. It is in this distant place that we meet Chris, a visitor from Denver, determined to remain there for a few days because of an old friend named Billy. Before mysteriously disappearing, Billy asked Chris to carry out one final task: recover a package hidden in a specific location. In his message, Billy claimed that his time in society had come to an end, and that since Chris was the only companion he still trusted, he should do him this favor. For unknown reasons, Billy vanished without leaving any clues, causing fear and concern among friends and family, especially in Chris, who had known him since childhood. The owner of the residence hands over the house keys and informs him that his phone number is written in the guest book in case he needs help, but jokes that it would be better not to have to use it. After the man leaves, Chris carries his belongings into the house and quickly notices that the place has not received visitors for a long time. Shortly afterward, he decides to walk around the property to check if everything is peaceful. Beside the residence, there is a small old storage shed where Chris finally finds the package mentioned by Billy. While observing the object, painful thoughts invade his mind, causing him to feel a deep emotional discomfort. Back in the bedroom, he stares at the sealed package, noticing only a strange symbol drawn over the seal. At that moment, Chris receives a call from John. Answering outside the house, he is immediately questioned about his whereabouts, since his family noticed the disappearance of his passport and discovered that he had traveled without informing anyone. Chris replies that he will return home in a few days, but first he needs to resolve something important. John confronts him harshly, reminding him that Karen, his partner, is pregnant and was left without answers. Knowing that Chris is involved in Billy's situation, John tries to convince him that his friend's disappearance was not his fault, claiming that Billy suffered from mental problems and said nonsensical things. Irritated by hearing that, Chris throws the phone away, leaving John talking alone. Minutes later, Chris finally opens the package. Inside, he finds a folder filled with documents and a flash drive. Upon accessing the files, he watches a video recorded by Billy, in which his friend reveals details about his life and who he truly became. Billy says that he worked as a researcher in the psychological field, and that after a tragic incident involving his mountaineering team, he was never the same man again. He claims that everything people started saying about him was true. Billy explains that even before the expedition, the group was conducting a study related to a psychological phenomenon called primary fear. According to him, the research analyzed the existential terror many people feel when they realize how insignificant they are before the infinite vastness of the universe. For Billy, this thought made individuals mentally fragile and vulnerable to psychological collapse. As the video continues, Chris observes documents filled with the same strange symbol drawn over the bodies of several volunteer subjects. Billy explains that many participants in the experiment ended up embracing the idea that they were nothing more than irrelevant fragments of existence. Some went completely insane, while others took their own lives. According to him, the social experiment was repeated in several parts of the world, involving people from different cultures, and most reported the same disturbing sensation, the impression of living inside a dream. Billy then reveals the central theory of the cult he discovered during his investigation. Its members believed that all existence was merely a reflection of the mind of an ancient and divine sleeping being. They called this entity the First, and believed they should seek it through prayers, rituals, and worship. Billy explains that many cult members discussed the possibility that if this entity awakened, all reality would cease to exist. It is then that Billy reveals the cult's true objective: awaken the entity and bring an end to the universe and society. Before ending the recording, Billy asks Chris to carefully study all the documents and, if he believes any of it, deliver the information to people capable of stopping what was happening. At that moment, Chris realizes that Billy had also been consumed by the terrifying idea of being merely part of the dream of a divine entity. Most likely, his friend disappeared to deepen his studies about the cult and ended up finding his own death. Chris observes the countless drawings scattered through the documents, strange faces, unknown symbols, and disturbing representations, all connected to the narrative Billy described about true reality. Still shaken by the loss of his friend, Chris decides to rest before beginning to analyze all that material in detail. However, during the night, a deep and powerful voice echoes through the darkness, narrating that everyone is alone in the void and that there is no hope there. Soon after, a disturbing phrase resonates like a prayer, a request for a door to be opened to the other side, allowing the light to reveal true reality. Frightened, Chris awakens to sounds coming from outside the house. Approaching the window, he observes a human figure dressed in a dark robe, silently standing while staring at him through the night. Terrified by what he witnessed, Chris tries to hide inside the house. Suddenly, his car alarm goes off unexpectedly. Thinking it might be a robbery, he grabs a knife and a flashlight before going outside to check what is happening. Chris carefully observes the surroundings of the property, but finds no one. Even so, consumed by fear and tension, he shouts for the intruder to leave before he is forced to react violently. Still shaken by what he saw during the night, he returns inside the house and immediately locks the door. As soon as he reaches the living room, he receives a call from Karen, but decides not to answer. The scene then changes to the following morning, in another region, deep within a dense and dark forest. A man slowly walks through the woods while repeating strange phrases, asking for the portal to open and for the light to illuminate his path. Without any apparent direction, he continues advancing through the forest as if guided by something invisible. Back to Chris, he wakes up and checks if everything is in order inside the house, trying to convince himself that everything he witnessed during the night was nothing more than a mirage caused by fear and exhaustion. A short time later, he decides to call Mrs. Duffy, Billy's mother. During the conversation, Chris deeply laments his friend's death and confesses feeling guilty for having spent so many months without looking for him. He admits believing that he could have helped Billy emotionally before it was too late. Mrs. Bornian-Lan. Duffy gently interrupts him, trying to comfort him by saying that he was never responsible for what happened and that he had always been a positive influence in Billy's life. However, Chris also wishes to better understand the events involving his friend, Mrs. Duffy then reveals that, after returning from Bosnia, Billy developed an inexplicable obsession with an old rural region where they used to spend vacations when they were children. According to her, her son began asking constant questions about the woods near the forest and about the old cabin where he used to remain alone for hours, exactly the same place where he spent his final moments alive. Upon hearing that, Chris looks once more at the map left by Billy, containing the exact coordinates of a location in the forest. After ending the call, he continues analyzing the strange drawings made by his friend. Among all of them, one in particular catches his attention: the figure of a man standing before a colossal and mysterious structure. Determined to discover what led Billy to make the worst decision of his life, Chris places some belongings into his backpack and heads toward the forest. During the journey, he recalls his friend's words about suspicious people he believed existed in the shadows, members of a cult that wished to awaken a sleeping entity, and that was supposedly connected to several brutal crimes spread around the world. The victims' photographs revealed a disturbing symbol: a slashed circle inscribed inside a larger one. The same sign was found in several places around the world, always associated with scenes of brutal crimes, as if it were part of an ancient sacrificial ritual. As investigations progressed, it was revealed that the cult responsible for those acts took pleasure in committing atrocities because they believed that human suffering and death were paths to achieving true reality. Their objective was to awaken the sleeping entity and, when that happened, be chosen by it as worthy of transcendence. The cult believed that, once the ritual was completed, a portal would open for the chosen ones, allowing them to cross into another dimension, a place they considered the true reality. However, one question remained unanswered: how could people spread across different parts of the world share exactly the same belief and the same obsessive desire to reach that alternate reality? After hours walking through the dense forest, Chris finally finds the tree portrayed in Billy's drawings. As he approaches, he notices ropes hanging from its aged branches and immediately senses that the place carried the presence of death. Suddenly, a sound coming from behind him catches his attention. Looking back, he sees a dead crow lying on the ground. Intrigued and frightened, he approaches the bird, but soon other birds begin falling lifeless from the branches above. Within seconds, dozens of dead crows fall not only around the tree, but throughout the entire forest area. Unable to understand the terrifying phenomenon, Chris desperately runs back to the house. As soon as he enters the residence, he looks through the window and once again sees what he believed had been only a mirage during the night. The same man dressed in a dark robe, standing on the other side of the fence, silently watching him from a distance. Convinced that he is being pursued by a criminal, Chris immediately calls the police and reports that a stranger is wandering around the property and trying to invade the land. However, in the middle of the call, his cell phone suddenly dies. After placing the device on the charger and looking back out the window, the hooded man is no longer there. Concerned for his safety, Chris decides to once again inspect the surroundings of the house, but finds no sign whatsoever of the intruder. Suddenly, his laptop exits sleep mode by itself, and a video begins playing automatically. In the recording, a criminal belonging to the cult, captured after murdering his own family, gives a disturbing interview. The man claims he committed all of that in order to be noticed when the world everyone believes to be real finally ceases to exist. At that moment, a police vehicle arrives at the property to respond to the report. Chris explains to the officer that he believes he is being watched and pursued by a stranger, and confesses feeling that something terrible is about to happen. The policeman carefully observes Chris's nervous behavior and asks what he is doing in such an isolated place. He then advises him to remain alert, but warns that he may not be able to arrive as quickly next time, suggesting that the best option would be to immediately leave the region. Chris replies that he intends to remain for a few more days, but notices strange behavior in the officer as he prepares to leave. Suspicious of how quickly the police arrived and of the man's suspicious attitude, Chris asks to see his official identification. However, the supposed policeman simply ignores the question and leaves without answering, increasing Chris's suspicions even further. In another location, the narrative shows a woman walking alone through the dense vegetation of the forest. As she advances with no apparent destination, she repeats the same strange words spoken by the man lost in the woods, as if she were being guided by something invisible towards some point in the forest. Back at the house, Chris continues listening to Billy's recordings. The researcher reports that he and part of his team followed clues they believed would lead them to answers in Bosnia. However, despite the long investigation, no concrete event related to the symbol was found. Even so, during the return trip, everyone began constantly suffering from nightmares involving the cult's tales and rituals. The worst happened when, after leaving the places where they were staying, they would discover the next day that the police had found bloodstains and signs of macabre sacrifices in small woods near the regions they had passed through. Billy says that the group realized they were being hunted by the cult members, and fear led them to make a painful decision: never return to their families, because they believed they would place everyone at risk. To make matters worse, the authorities began investigating the murders and eventually accused Billy's team of the atrocities committed. Dominated by terror, many group members decided to surrender to the authorities in hopes of protection. However, before even a week had passed, news reports stated that each of them had been found dead alongside their families. Billy then reveals that he spent weeks hiding, leaving only him and Paula, his research assistant. With nowhere left to run, he decided to head toward the old region where Duffy and his family used to spend vacations, an isolated place far from any habitation. Billy believed that, if the cult finally found them, the location would minimize the consequences of a possible attack. Days later, Billy and Paula witnessed something terrifying in a clearing within the forest. Several cult members were performing a macabre ritual. Hooded people surrounded a man while one of the members brutally wounded him with deep cuts. However, instead of showing pain, the victim seemed to feel pleasure during the suffering. The entire ceremony was being observed by another completely hooded figure, exactly the same dark man Chris had seen watching the house. Billy reports that Paula, horrified by that atrocity, let out a scream of terror, unintentionally revealing their presence. Immediately, the cult members began chasing them through the forest. Amid the chaos, Billy and Paula ended up separated, and he was never able to find her again. Weeks later, Paula was found alive in a hospital, but completely transformed. She behaved like a wild animal, lost in delusions and without any mental stability, as if her sanity had been destroyed by what she witnessed in that forest. Billy says that he began seeing the hooded figure, whom he calls the Observer. He claims that something dark pursues him, wanting to torment him and destroy his sanity. However, the days are becoming increasingly difficult to endure. The scene changes to a distant celestial body, resembling a lifeless planet, while the voice echoes, saying that the door searches for someone, offering the light of reality. For a brief moment, we see Chris standing before the structure from the drawings, as if possessed by something beyond human comprehension. Back in reality, he awakens and notices the front door standing open. Soon, a noise coming from upstairs disturbs him. He then goes upstairs to investigate and notices in a hallway a man suffocating himself with a plastic bag. The sight terrifies him and causes him to awaken from what was merely a nightmare. Early in the morning, his partner calls questioning his disappearance. Chris regrets what he is doing, but claims that what happened to his friend tormented him, and he needs to discover what happened. Karen asks his whereabouts, and Chris reveals that he is in Wales, the last place where Billy was found dead. Chris promises he will return the following day. When he goes outside to check the surroundings, he notices the strange observer standing on the road. Chris confronts him, blaming him for leading his friend to destruction, and threatens the hooded figure if he comes closer. Something leaves him even more worried when the observer throws Chris's car keys onto the road, showing that he had been much closer than Chris imagined. Frightened, Chris enters the house and, in the living room, is surprised when the television turns on and displays Paula's interview. The woman says that there is no hope for them and that the light will always pursue them. She then stabs herself with a pencil and dies. Chris becomes terrified when, immediately afterward, she appears on the screen as if still alive, saying that he will soon discover the truth. Chris looks outside and sees the unknown creature slowly turning as if asking him to follow it. The young man then grabs a blade and follows after the hooded figure. Both enter the forest, and Chris eventually loses sight of the creature. However, he sees the woman from before approaching and repeating the strange phrase. Her eyes are blinded by a strong light, but she can still locate the man before her. The scene is confusing and terrifying, but soon the deep voice echoes in Chris's ears, claiming that the woman before him is a door to achieving redemption and that the key is in his hands. The voice begins tormenting him, but he decides to flee when the other man appears. Chris returns to the house out of breath, but the voice continues pursuing him, offering salvation from the false reality in which he lives. The entity claims that the more doors are opened, the more he will find the light and awaken. Chris rejects the request, confronting the damned cult for having killed his friend. Yet the voice echoing from outside claims that Billy is one of them because he accepted the light. The entity offers Chris a new life, knowing that he carries regrets, weaknesses, and guilt for not having helped Billy before the cult did. Suddenly, the upstairs window shatters, and Chris goes to investigate. He discovers it is the man from the forest. Hiding himself, he manages to lock the man inside the room before being noticed. As he descends the stairs of the house, Chris once again hears the observer's voice coming from outside, echoing through the darkness like a supernatural whisper. The entity claims that if he rejects the blessing being offered, chaos and suffering will reach his wife, his son, and everyone he loves. Upon hearing threats directed at his own family, Chris is consumed by fury and fear. He grabs a blade and violently opens the house door, but finds nobody standing outside the entrance. Determined to discover who is playing with his mind, he grabs the flashlight and begins checking the surroundings of the property. At that moment, voices begin emerging from his cell phone lying on the grass near the house. They are disturbing messages. He hears his wife's voice coldly despising him, while a coworker claims he was fired and abandoned by everyone. Soon after, dozens of voices begin echoing around the forest, endlessly repeating for the door to be opened. The sounds seem to come from every direction at once, slowly destroying Chris's sanity. Confused, terrified, and unable to clearly see what exists around him, he begins striking the emptiness with the blade in desperation. However, amid the breakdown, Chris strikes a man hidden in the darkness and kills him with a brutal blow. Somewhere hidden among the shadows, the dark entity silently watches everything, displaying a satisfied smile before the chaos it caused. Suddenly, unknown hands violently grab Chris and drag him into the darkness of the forest. For a brief instant, we contemplate a terrifying vision. Chris stands before what was once the structure depicted in Billy's drawings, but now realizes that it was not an ordinary construction. The structure slowly twists, revealing itself to be a colossal and living creature belonging to some other plane of existence. At dawn, Chris awakens in the middle of the forest, lying beneath the tree of death. Disoriented, he notices that he is shirtless and that the same symbol seen in the drawings and on the victims' bodies is now deeply marked on his back. Suddenly, several masked people emerge around him, observing him in absolute silence. Among them, the hooded observer slowly approaches. Upon standing before Chris, he removes the bandages covering his face, revealing a completely disfigured visage. Still dazed and unable to understand what happened, Chris asks what they did to him. The stranger then explains that Billy also tried to reject the blessings offered by the entity, and even confronted the cult members in an attempt to destroy them. But fate was cruel to him. The human creature claims that Chris still has one final choice: accept becoming one of them and guarantee his family's safety as long as he does not resist. However, upon realizing that accepting that proposal would mean contributing to more deaths and strengthening the belief destined to awaken the ancestral entity, Chris makes a desperate decision. Before they can stop him, he drives a stake into his own body, mortally wounding himself. When he partially regains consciousness, he realizes he is inside an unfamiliar house in a silent and illuminated dimension. Descending the stairs of the place, he finds Billy standing there waiting for him. Confused, Chris asks where they are. Billy replies that he does not know exactly, but believes that place is a kind of refuge created by his own mind, a shelter against the persecutions, traumas, and pain he carried. However, Billy makes it clear that this is not the place where Chris should remain, because he still has a long life ahead of him and a family that needs him. His old friend then comforts him, speaking about his fears, his feelings of guilt, and the emotional burden he carried because of Billy's death. After the brief conversation, Chris's consciousness abruptly returns to the real world. He awakens while being treated by doctors and paramedics. A few hours later, already in the hospital, Chris is interrogated by the same police officer who had previously been at the house. The officer asks what he can remember, explaining that, upon returning to the residence, he found a scene of death in front of the property and began suspecting that Chris might be responsible for the murder. He then informs him that Karen wishes to speak with him and places the cell phone in his hands. Chris emotionally hears his wife's voice on the other side of the call, feeling relieved to know she is alive. However, his expression immediately changes when he notices a dead crow in front of the hospital room door. At that moment, he realizes in terror that his nightmare is far from over.